Hello, Summers. We're here with the regular season recap for year one in the SSHL. That's right. We are finally at the end of the regular season and we are headed into the playoffs here. But first, before we get into all the playoff matchups, we're going to take a look at all of the human control team stats. And we will go in order of the final human GM team power rankings for the season. So starting things out, we have the Utah Mammoth, who finished 43, 26, and 13. Leading the way in scoring for them is Clayton Keller with 93 points in 81 games played. Then you have Schmaltz with 80, Gunther with 76, Cooley with 63, and Sergachev with 51. So overall, it looks like solid season for their scoring. And then also in goal, you have a 907 save percentage for both Vejmelka and Ingram. Vejmelka in 48 games played, and then Ingram in 39. So very solid season for Utah, and it looks like they are indeed going to be in the playoffs for this year, number one. As a matter of fact, they are the only human control team in these playoffs, and sitting in second in the human control team power rankings, you have the New York Rangers, who finished 39, 33, and 10, 88 points on the season. Leading the way in scoring for them is JT Miller with 74 points. Then you have Panarin and Kreider with 65, Fox with 56, and Lafreniere with 51. And then in goal, you have a 901 save percentage for Shesterkin in 66 games played, and Quick with a 914 in 17 games played. So I think the biggest question for New York going into this offseason obviously has got to be Igor Shesterkin, and you have to wonder how much he's going to be asking for as well. And sitting in third in the human GM team power rankings, you have the Vegas Golden Knights, who finished 38, 33, and 11. Currently leading the way in scoring for them is Eichel with 81 points. Then you have Dorofeyev with 70, Hurdle with 68, Barbashev with 67, and Stone with 62. And then in goal, you have an 889 save percentage for Adin Hill in 64 games played, and Korpisalo in 22 games played with an 891. So Vegas, despite the good start to the season that they had and maintaining the second position in the human GM team power rankings for the majority of the season, it looks like their goaltending might have hurt them a little bit too much this season. So that is something to keep an eye on as we head into this offseason. And sitting in fourth in the human GM team power rankings, you have the 37, 35, and 10 Buffalo Sabres, as you have Peterka leading the way in scoring for them with 65 points. Then you have Thompson with 55, Zucker with 54, Power with 42, and Malenstein with 39. And then in goal, you have a 905 save percentage in 82 games played for Luukkonen, so got absolutely no rest throughout the entire season. 7 shutouts, so not a bad season for Luukkonen. So it should be pretty interesting to see what kind of growth Buffalo gets over the offseason. I'm particularly looking at Zach Benson, who is 19 years of age, 2.5-star talent, 4-star potential. He had 35 points this past season in 64 games played, so I'm going to be keeping an eye on him for sure. And then sitting in fifth, you have the 33, 39, and 10 St. Louis Blues. Leading the way in point scoring for them is Jordan Kyrou with 56 points. Then you have Buchnevich with 50, Bolduc with 45, Pareko with 40, and then Walker with 36. And then in goal, you have a 905 save percentage and 5 shutouts for Binnington in 58 games played. And then you have a 902 save percentage and 2 shutouts in 32 games played for Hofer. And then sitting in sixth in the human GM team power rankings, you have the 34, 43, and 5 Anaheim Ducks, led by Troy Terry with 63 points in 81 games played. Then you have McTavish for 49, Strome with 48, Zegras for 47, and Fabry with 42. And in goal, you have an 897 save percentage for DeStahl in 61 games played and an 892 for Husso in 25. And then sitting in seventh, you have the Pittsburgh Penguins, who finished 30, 45, and 7 on the regular season. Crosby leads the way in scoring with 53 points, then Malkin with 45, Tolvanen with 44, Raquel with 39, and Evangelista with 34. He was a trade deadline acquisition for them. He had 17 points in 34 games played for Pittsburgh. And then in goal, you have Nedeljkovic with 41 games played and a 909 save percentage, so it looks like Pittsburgh may want to move forward with Nedeljkovic. Obviously, it's not my call to make, but that does certainly seem like the direction that Pittsburgh is going to be going in here with Nedeljkovic. And then you have Blomqvist in 31 games played with an 891, and then Jari in 16 games played with an 875. And sitting in eighth in the human GM team power rankings, you have the 23, 55, and 4 Calgary Flames. They are certainly going to be in the running for the first overall pick, and it would not surprise me if they do end up getting it. You have Kadri leading the way in scoring with 43 points. Then you have Coronado with 42, Huberdeau with 37, Farabee with 35, and Uyghur with 30. And it was just an overall rough season for the Calgary Flames here, as their goaltender Dustin Wolf in 81 games played has an 898 save percentage and 5 shutouts. And then Vladar in 8 games played has a 9-12. So now we're going to take a look at the final standings for the season. And once again, Utah is indeed the only human-controlled team that made the playoffs. As in the Atlantic, you have Florida, Montreal, and Toronto. Then you have in the Metro, Carolina, New Jersey, and Washington. And then the two wild cards in the East, you have Detroit and Tampa. And then in the Pacific, you have LA, Edmonton, and Seattle. Then in the Central, you have Dallas, Winnipeg, Utah. And then the two wildcards for the West, you have Minnesota and Vancouver. So now let's take a look at the top stat leaders in the league throughout this season. Starting with goals, you have Eichel with 52. Then you have Connor with 51 and Draisaitl with 50. Rantanen also with 50, tied for third. And then in assists, you have McDavid, of course, no surprise there, with 80. And then Draisaitl with 61. So a huge gap between McDavid and Draisaitl for sure. And then Barkov, Hanifin, Hintz, and Kaprizov follow after. And then as for points, McDavid also leads the way there with 128, no surprise. And then you have Draisaitl and Kucherov, who also eclipsed 100 points. So 3 100-point players this year. Then leading the way in shots, you have Connor McDavid with 376. Then Kaprizov and Connor follow soon after with 368 and 367 respectively. Plus minus, Jake Evans leads the way on Montreal with a plus 44. Then face-off percentage, John Tavares with a 60.8 leads the league in face-offs. And that's almost an entire 3% better than the second place Casey Cizikas with a 58% on the face-offs. Then shots blocked, you have Rasmus Andersson on Calgary with 253. Penalty minutes, you have Kyle Burrows on LA with 153. Leading the way in power play goals, you have Quinton Byfield with 16 on LA. And then Lars Eller leads the way in shorthanded goals in the league with 5 for Washington. And then in goal, you have 45 wins for Bobrovsky, leads the league in wins. And then leading the league in losses is Dustin Wolf at 53 on Calgary. Not really a surprise there considering their season. And that is way ahead of second place there with Luukkonen with 35 on Buffalo. Then you have, of course, Dustin Wolf with the most goals against with 240. The best goals against average in the league is Sam Montembeault on Montreal with a 2.21. Save percentage, Cam Talbot leads the way with a 925 save percentage for Detroit in 50 games played. So that's a pretty good season for Cam Talbot, especially at 37 years of age. It will be interesting to see how long he can keep that up. And it looks like Detroit just had a really good goaltending tandem in general this year. I don't know if it's their defense. I don't know if it's their structure or whatnot. But Peter Mrazek in 35 games played also had a 923. So Detroit very good with goaltending and possibly defense in general. And then leading the way in shutouts is Jake Oettinger for Dallas with 11 shutouts. That is 3 more than the second place Bobrovsky with 8. And then goals saved above average, Cam Talbot, no surprise there, with the 29.26. That is the best in the league. And now let's take a look at the team stats. Goals for per game. Edmonton led the way with a 3.56, but then you have Vegas following short after with a 3.44, second in the league. And then goals against per game, you have the Montreal Canadiens sitting in first with the 2.32. And who is the first human-controlled team? It would be the New York Rangers with a 2.79 goals against per game, who sit 11th in the league in that category. Face-off wise, you have the Toronto Maple Leafs leading the way with a 54.6, and then the first human-controlled team on the list is the New York Rangers with a 53% on the face-offs, the third in the league in that category. Let's see, power play, you have Edmonton leading the way with a 23.5 power play percentage, and then the first human-controlled team is Utah, currently 9th in the league with an 18.5. And then on the penalty kill, it looks like you have 3 human control teams in a row here, as Calgary, despite their struggles, has the league's best penalty kill with an 88.6 on the penalty kill. And then you have Buffalo following with an 88.2, and then the New York Rangers with an 88.1. So very, very close between those 3 teams. And now to wrap things up for this video, we'll take a look at the playoff matchups. You have Vancouver versus Dallas, Utah versus Winnipeg. Once again, the only human-controlled team in the playoffs. We'll follow along with that series in the next one. And then you have Minnesota versus LA, Seattle versus Edmonton, and then in the East, you have Tampa versus Florida. Nice rivalry there. Toronto versus Montreal, Detroit versus Carolina, and Washington versus New Jersey. So I think with that being said, that'll be about it for this one, but not before I thank the channel members. Thank you guys so much for all your supports, and I'll see you guys in the next one when we go through the year 1 playoffs in the SSHL.